Today is February 20th, 2014, and I have prepared an agenda for today. Please go to the next page to see the agenda. So I'm going to be talking about three major aspects. The first is the new economic context of Latin America, and I'll talk about the major business opportunities in the region. Then I'll talk about the exhibition industry portrait. I'll give you some statistics and the idea of the key players and some other indicators. And then I'll talk about going into Latin America and doing business there. I'll mention the differences with other regions, the surprises, and the challenges that we have. So the first topic is the new economic context. And when I mention new, it's because Latin America is now a very different region in terms of economic development in comparison to 2 decades ago. From being a region with a lot of difficulties, now we are one of the most dynamic and emerging regions in the world. So the next slide shows some of the most important indicators in terms of social development and economical development. This is a comparison between 1993 and 2013. You see the GDP per capita, unemployment rate, life expectancy, inflation rate, foreign debt, population with income of less than $1 per day or $2 per day. And in most of these cases, our indicators are similar to the ones in the Eurozone or even in the US. The next slide. Another important change is the GDP growth. In the 80s, you see here in the arrow, we had a 2% GDP growth as an average. And then in the 90s, we had 2.7%. And then we had a huge jump, not huge, but, well, important jump to 4%. Next slide. So what's behind the growth? Definitely, we have learned from the previous 31 economic crises. Our governments are doing better, and the region has become more resilient. Poverty has been reduced by the implementation of public policies, and Latin America is more open to international trade. We have been helped by the boom in the commodity prices and the fact that China and the US are our largest trading partners. That has helped us to get richer. The other factor is the importance of the 5 largest companies. You see that they have been growing at a really fast pace, even more than of the countries in which they are based. For example, in 2012, their income grew at 6.5%, which is as double as the regional GDP growth. The next factor would be the very strong internal market with a higher purchasing power per capita coming from a growing middle class. And the last factor would be that now we have more access to finances, to the financial system. So next slide. These three figures show the importance of our GDP growth. The number one says that in 2012, we were the region with the highest growth receiving foreign direct investment. The second example shows that in 2012, Brazil became the 6th largest economy in the world. And the third says that 2 years ago, our average rate was 4.3%. That's adding 17 countries. Next slide. So other statistics. Our population is almost 600 million people. We account for 9% of the world GDP. Our public debt is controlled, 31% of the GDP, and the inflation rate is also controlled, 3%. You see here the chart below with the doing business report, and it shows that 4 countries, which are Peru, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, are below the 50th positions in terms of doing business. So that means that coming here and doing business is nice, it's friendly, and more countries are getting close to the first positions. And if you see the GDP growth in 2013, the region got a 2.6% average. So that's relatively stable. So next slide. That was a good part, but we still have some economic risk, challenges, and burdens. I would say the number one risk is our dependence on commodity prices. Commodity prices have grown a lot in the last decades, but in 2012 they started to drop. And if we have, if that happens, then governments will have a slower tax base, and they will need to do more with less resources. The second challenge is the low level of productivity. You see that the productivity of the large companies in Latin America is 6 times greater than the one of the small and medium-sized businesses. The third challenge is infrastructure. I would say that is the biggest challenge, although I already put it in number third, that governments need to be aware that if we don't work in building more roads, airports, and ports, we won't be competitive. The fourth challenge is inequality. There is a big gap between social classes. The fifth would be the of um, concentration of power and wealth in the large cities. We see that 10 cities, the 10 largest cities generate 30% of the GDP. So in summary, you can say that there are two split Latin Americas, one with the middle income countries and the other one with countries that are still dealing with low levels of development. Let's go to the next slide. This is a report of the World Economic Forum, and it's called the Global Competitiveness Report from 2013. And you see that they have identified that technological readiness, higher education and training, and innovation are the three most important aspects in which Latin America has to work in order to be more competitive. And that's what everybody's doing in the rest of the world. So next slide. What's coming? Good expectations. I would say that four factors will drive our economy in the next years. The first is that we will continue to have an expansion of the middle class, and that will make us more resilient to economic crisis, and our domestic demand market will be bigger. The other aspect is that infrastructure projects and investment supported by the government will pull the economy up. And of course, stronger macroeconomic conditions will help the region to recover well, in case of an external adversity. I mentioned that Latin America grew at a 2.6% last year. So according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, we don't have to be that much worried about it because that change was cyclical rather than structural. And the same unit predicts that for the next 3 years, we're going to have a 3.7% growth. So that's good. That's important. You see here the 2014 forecast in which the region is expected to grow at a 3.7%. And you see some numbers like Argentina with one of the lowest um, indicators, and Venezuela, but those cases are very specific and are not the most common ones. All of the other countries will grow at around 4 or 3%, and some important cases like Panama, and I will let you know why in the next slides. So let's move to the next slide. That's business opportunities and country analysis. I won't read all of these data because we don't have much time, and I will just read some of the most important figures. So Brazil, they have almost 200 million people. They are the 6th largest economy in the world and the first in Latin America. They are a very large domestic market and are very inward oriented. So they do business in its own, and sometimes they don't need the rest of the world to participate in their economy. Actually, for 2020, they are expected to be the 5th largest consumer market in the world. 2 years ago, they were the first market in the perfume industry, the 4th in automobile, the 4th in food and beverage, and so on. Their economy is based on 4 consolidated business sectors. The first is manufacturing. They are very good at the textile, clothing, and shoes. aircraft, motor vehicles, and automobiles. The second business sector is mining and oil. The third is services. It accounts for 66% of the GDP. And then agriculture with 5.4%. For some challenges, more inclusion, more infrastructure, and they still have some very high labor and transportation costs. Thank you, Diana. Next slide. So let's talk about growing sectors and business opportunities. I'm just going to read the title of each of them, and you'll have the PowerPoint presentation to analyze it in detail. So Brazil, oil and gas, aerospatial, venture capital and private equity, medical devices, tourism and real estate, renewable energy, semiconductors. Let's go to Mexico. Mexico, 114 million people. They are the 14th economy in the world and the second in Latin America. For consolidated business sectors, manufacturing with food and beverage and tobacco, textiles and clothing, motor vehicles, automobile, consumer durables, so very similar to Brazil. Then minerals and metals. Tourism, which is different from Brazil, it accounts for 9% of the GDP. And remittances, so that's money coming from the US because a lot of workers are living in the US, that accounts for 2% of the GDP. Business environment is very friendly, especially for manufacturing companies operating from Mexico and selling their products to the US. So that has been very important for Mexico because they have lower wages and a highly skilled force. They are very open to foreign trade with 12 free trade agreements with 44 countries. Then let's go to the most important business opportunities. In commodities, Mexico is determined to be one of the world's top 10 aviation suppliers. The agricultural business is still sector is still growing, and it accounts for 3% of the GDP. The automobile and manufacturing electronics industry, it accounts for 30% of the country's exports. Environmental and renewable energy, packaging, IT, healthcare, housing and construction, and within the service sector, education, security, travel and tourism, and of course, telecommunications and everything related to IT. Now let's go to the next slide. I will see Colombia, which is my country, and I'm very proud to talk about it. We have almost 50 million people who are the 30th economy in the world and the fourth in Latin America. Our economy is consolidated, especially in manufacturing, same sectors than in Brazil and in Mexico. But then we have something different, which is very important: chemical industry, oil and gas, and mining, especially gold, emeralds, and coal. Our business environment is also very friendly. For instance, we are the 6th country in the world for investor protection, but things have been different now from what it used to be in the last 2 decades. And you see that because of the increase in security, and that has been a large or a very strong work from the last 2 governments. And of course, if security has been improving, then foreign direct investment comes, and new projects, especially in the oil and gas sectors, have been pulling up the economy. So business opportunities, which is in the next slide, that's water management, oil and gas, infrastructure, agribusiness, information technology, telecommunication, the maritime sector, textile and apparel, sustainable energy, food processing, cosmetics, machinery, tourism. Okay, for the next 4 questions, I won't give you as much details. I'm just gonna give you some important facts. Chile has less population, only 16 million people, 43% concentrated in Santiago. It has a very friendly environment, and actually they are one of the countries with the highest reception of foreign investment in the world. Peru has the same nice, friendly business environment, 30 million people in Peru. Then Panama, and I have put it in here because even if it's a smaller economy, this year they have a lot of business opportunities because there is a expansion project for the canal, so that will bring a lot of projects, especially in infrastructure. Then Paraguay, and I have put it here because in the last 2 years they have done very well in terms of GDP growth. They only have 25%, 25 million people, but they are still very concentrated in the agricultural side, and almost 45% of the country's population depend completely on farming and agriculture. And I have added Argentina because it's a special case. They are one of the largest economy in the region, actually the third. However, they are not doing well because of the current because of the current government and all of the protectionist measures that have been taking place in the last 2 or 3 years. So next, I'm going to talk about the exhibition industry portrait, and I have added a subtitle called "A Region of Great Diversity." Diversity because you see a lot of markets with different levels of development in terms of exhibitions. In our association, we have identified three major blocks. The first block, which you will see in green in the map, corresponds to the markets with a higher degree of development. Those are Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia. Then the second group is the developing trade show markets, including Ecuador, Chile, and Peru. Those are in blue in the map. And then the fledgling markets where Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Venezuela, and Central America are located, and they are in orange in the map. So of course, as it happens in almost all of the world, you see a correlation between economic development and trade show development. So we saw that the larger countries were Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, and it is here the same in terms of the exhibition industry development, but I underline that there are some exceptions because you cannot think that if a show is taking place in a small town in Brazil, because it is in one of the most dynamic countries in terms of the economic development, it is going to be very well structured and development. Or you cannot think the opposite way, that if a show that is taking place in the fledgling markets, for example, in Uruguay, so it won't offer good conditions for exhibitors or visitors, so you cannot say that. It may offer good conditions for exhibitors and visitors, and we'll talk about it later on. So let's go to the next slide. This is a matrix with 9 indicators that show the development of the exhibition industry. And you see that I have put the 3 blocks here, and I have qualified the quality of these indicators in the 3 blocks. For example, in the first block, which is Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, they usually receive 4 stars out of 5. So that means that in 4 out of 5, that's a good indicator. The second block receives usually 3 stars or 2, and the third block receives usually 2 stars or 1 out of 5. And the indicators are those in which we have noticed that we still have to work, or well, and these indicators work in I think in any part of the world, and that's exhibition culture, infrastructure, the presence of multinational exhibition companies, governmental support, the presence of well-established service providers, strong presence of international exhibitors and visitors, innovative business models, the use of innovative IT platforms and tools, and last but not least, the resilience to economic change. So I'll go to the next slide, and I'll tell you something very important about this division. Even if we have made this division in our association, we cannot say that this is the only truth in the region, because the region is huge and there is a single reality in each country, and each country is unique. So you will find things that are different in each country, even if the country has a good level of development in terms of the exhibition industry. So it is not possible to generalize, and we don't pretend to have the universal truth about it, but we will suggest analyzing each case in particular if you are coming here to do business or to expand your business. Okay, so let's go to the next statistics, to the next slide. And statistics, we cannot provide very well statistics yet because there is a lack of information in most of the cases, and the information management is not good either. So statistics are not completely sound. I'm just going to give you the number of some figures, but I want to explain how we obtain this information. We have, of course, direct contact with our members, and with the members that are not, with the other companies that are not our members, we have gone into their web pages, which are almost 1,500 web pages, and we have obtained the information from them. But as you will see, it's not possible to obtain all of the information in those web pages, neither from our members. So some numbers that I will give you um, will be based in only a percentage of the research. So let's go to the next slide. So for the calendar of shows in 2013 and this year, we have identified almost 2,000 exhibitions in Latin America. So that's counting annual and biannual shows. And this chart shows the division of the three blocks that I mentioned before. So you see that the first block, which is Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, accounts for 73% of the market activity in the region. So that's a very high concentration. For example, Brazil, it's very similar to Mexico with 500 exhibition shows and, well, around 500 exhibition shows. Then there is a tie between Argentina and Colombia with almost 200 shows each. Then comes all of the others, and the country with less exhibitions is Nicaragua with only 5 exhibitions. And somebody could think that that is not possible, but actually it is possible. This market in Central America is more oriented towards events, congresses, corporate events, rather than to exhibitions. So let's go to the next slide. This is a top 20 of the city segmentation. So these are the cities with the highest activity in terms of exhibition industry. And again, you see a very concentrated market with 21% of the exhibitions taking place in 2 cities. Those are Sao Paulo in Brazil with 242 shows and Mexico City with 165 shows. Bogota and Buenos Aires are in the 4th and 3rd place respectively. And these 25 cities represent 67% of the exhibition activity. Let's go to the next slide. This is the industry classification, and of course, we use the UFI industry classification. You see the first industry sector is leisure, hobby, and entertainment, with 12% of the exhibitions taking, well, with 12% of the exhibitions. Those are 233 shows. And you may be wondering, why is this sector so big in Latin America? Well, the reason is that half of those exhibitions, so almost 115, take place in Mexico. And Mexico is a very important market for all of the shows related to doing parties or bridal or weddings or kids and youth. So these exhibitions take place twice per year, and they move from city to city. So maybe one exhibition, let's call it the wedding show, produced by an exhibition organizer, will take place 5 times per year and will be celebrated in 5 different cities. So that's why the amount goes very high. The second sector is business services with 9% of the market. Then education. Education has the same behavior as leisure and hobby and entertainment. So that means the same exhibition moving on in a country and taking place a few times per year. Then comes food and beverage and hospitality. And the fifth sector will be textiles, apparel and fashion. You have the whole list there in case you want to take a deeper look. So let's go to the next slide. It is about the top 20 exhibition organizers. So as you may suppose, there are a lot of multinationals operating in the region. You see that from these 20 organizers, 30% of them are multinationals. The first one is Reed Exhibitions Alcántara Machado. They do 48 shows in their portfolio. The second will be Grupo Stipa Fiera Milano with 38 shows. That's also another multinational. The third place will be for Corferias, where I'm based. And we are a local company and we produce 36 shows in our portfolio. The fourth will be BTS Informa, another multinational company with 20 exhibitions, and the list goes on. And in these 20 exhibition organizers, you see that most of them are located in either Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, or Argentina, and there are some other exceptions. So let's go to the next slide. That, that corresponds to the top 20 venues in Latin America. And this measurement only relates to venues with exhibition activity. So it's very important for you to have in mind that I'm not talking about all of the events that take place in these venues, like congresses, corporate events, conferences, or other events, but only exhibitions. Because if you consider all of the other type of events, then the list would be different. So the first venue will be the World Trade Center in Mexico City with 102 shows, and that corresponds to 5% of the market share. Then comes Expo Guadalajara in Mexico with 4%, Expo Center Norte in Brazil with 3%, Corferias with 3.5%, and again, these venues are located in the most developed countries, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico. Let's go to the next slide. I'll show you some other metrics. And this is what I was telling you before. We won't be able to give you a very accurate number until we are able to get all of the information for all of the shows that takes place in Latin America. For example, the average event size, we can say that it's 17,000 square meters. However, this number is based on the information of only 435 shows that takes place from the whole market, which is almost 2,000 shows. So that corresponds to only 23% of the market share. Then comes the average length. That would be 3 days, and we can say that that is definitely the truth because that corresponds to the 100% of the data, so the 1,882 shows. Then we have the average size of visitors, which is 34,000 visitors per show, and again, that's only if we consider 408 exhibitions. It happens the same with the average size of exhibitors. When we consider 535 exhibitions, we get that the average size is 287 exhibitors. And the last indicator is that if we were to measure how many exhibitions are produced by an exhibition organizer, the number would be 1.8. But of course, they cannot do 1.8 exhibitions, but it would be 1. Let's go to the next slide. This is a list of the top 10 industry sectors that we saw before in the analysis of the number of exhibitions and the average size of shows. So for instance, the most important sector, which is leisure, it is the smallest one in terms of size, with only 5,000 square meters in average. But agriculture, forestry, and fishery, it is the sector with the largest amount of square meters. And of course, that's because some of these shows take place outdoor, not necessarily indoor. So let's go to the next slide. And let's talk about the exhibition organizers. So we have calculated, and you can see these in the bottom of the chart, that there are 1,001 exhibition companies in Latin America. Most of them, which are 77%, so those are 770 companies, produce or develop only one show per year. So you see that it is very common that maybe a company in a particular sector is specialized only in that sector. Then we say that 10% of the companies develop 2 exhibitions per year, 7%, which are 75 companies, produce between 3 and 5 shows, and the list goes on until you see that only 4 companies are capable of doing 35 or 47 shows per year, not necessarily per year, but in their portfolio, because this is considering, again, annual and biannual shows. So this says a lot about the behavior of the exhibition organizers in our region. So let's go to the next slide. And this is the list of all of the multinational companies operating here in Latin America. When I mention multinational companies, I'm not only talking about multinational with their home base in Europe, Asia, the Americas, or any other place in the world, but also Latin American multinational. That is the case, for example, if you see here in the chart, in orange to the right, you see that FPP Media is a Brazilian company operating in 5 countries. That is Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Venezuela. Well, the most important case, of course, is Brazil, with the highest presence of multinationals. There are 16 multinationals operating there. The first, well, no, this is not in importance, but you see some big names like GL Events, Grid Exhibitions, BTF, Nuremberg Messe, UVM, Hanover, Clarion, Messe Dusseldorf, Fiera Milano, Mack Brooks, Global Sources, Penwell, Vespa, and Tarsus Group. Let's go to the next slide. And you see the same list for Mexico. Actually, one of the last acquisitions or partnership was Tarsus with EJ Krause, and Mexico has 11 companies operating in Mexico. And as you can see here, some of them have direct offices in Mexico, and some others operate from abroad. So there is no one with a current office there, but the operations are directed from their home base. And of course, there is somebody there attending the show only during the show time. You have all the information on the other markets, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, and so on. Let's talk about infrastructure. I say this is a surprising reality because it is very different, in my opinion, to what could it be in Europe or in the US. And the reason of this is that exhibitions are not celebrated only in convention centers or venues, but in many other places. We have calculated that there are 503 places where exhibitions take place. And if you go to the next slide, you see that you see the other places where we hold events. For example, here, event centers, hotels, airports, parks, shopping centers, universities, museums, or cultural centers. I wanted to take a look at the case of Venezuela, which is in the bottom. You see that there are 7 hotels where exhibitions are held and 6 shopping centers. And if you add the 2 numbers, that gives you 13. And if you add the number of exhibition centers, 5, and the convention centers, 2, so that gets to be 7, which is of course less than the shopping centers and, and and hotels. So you see that in some countries, the activity takes place at not very common places for the development of a show. And if you see the case of Peru, you will see something similar with 6 hotels, 3 airports, 3 parks in opposition to only 3 exhibition centers and 5 convention centers. So let's go to the next slide. This is a list of all of the venues and exhibition centers per country. Let's take, oh, okay. The first thing that I want to say is that only 40% of the places to hold exhibitions are convention centers. So most of the activity doesn't take place in very well and structured places like in the rest of the world. So let's take the case of Brazil. There are 49 exhibition centers or venues in Brazil, and that accounts for 25% of all of the venues in Latin America. But within the Brazilian market, those 49 exhibition centers are only 34% of all of the possible facilities to do a show. So for me, that's surprising, that's outstanding, and that's shocking for some of you, or that could be shocking for some of you. However, you see some cases, which I have underlined in red. You see Bolivia. You see that 70% of the activity takes place in exhibition centers or venues. And you see the case of El Salvador in red, or Nicaragua. The 100% of the activity takes place only in conventions and venues. So you could say that, of course, it would be more convenient to do an exhibition in a very well-structured and well-equipped convention center or venue instead than in a park or a shopping center, which is, of course, not logic at all. So let's go to the next slide. This is the list of the 197 venues or exhibition centers we have in Latin America according to their size. So you see here that we don't have any venue larger than 1,000 square meters, 100,000 square meters. We only have 8 which are larger than 50,000 square meters. And then most of them range between 5,000 and 20,000 square meters, or even less than 5,000 square meters, which are 65 and 60 accordingly. So let's go to the next slide. That is the top 20 venues or exhibition centers in terms of size. So here you see the same venues that we have talked about it before, the ones in Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and some particular cases Panama and El Salvador. And the largest venue in the region is Expo Center Norte with 67,000 square meters of indoor exhibition space. This is important to have in mind. We're talking about indoor exhibition space. The second would be Anhembi in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Third would be Guadalajara. The fourth, Expo North. The fifth, Vento Goncalves. The sixth, Rio Centro. And the seventh, Corferias. Then Inmigrantes in Sao Paulo. And then La Rural in Buenos Aires, and so on. So let's go to the next slide. This chart shows the size, the indoor size exhibition space in Latin America. So if you add all of the venues, it gives you 2 million square meters. Well, 2 million and something square meters. Well, I don't know if I have the time to make some comments about Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. I will pass this slide, and I will go to the last part of the conference, which is going into Latin America, and we will talk about the differences. So what are some of the regional differences in exhibitions that an organizer should take into consideration? Definitely the long-term approach for doing business here. So if you come to Latin America, you have to be patient. And you can see that in a very simple example. How long someone from Latin America gets to answer an email. Maybe, well, of course, you cannot generalize that because that depends on each individual, on each person. But usually I could say that we may take a little longer in comparison to, for example, in the US. The second difference will be the dynamic region in terms of economic cycles. So again, think about the long term. And I give the Argentinian case because we have said that Argentina is one of the most developed countries in terms of exhibition industry indicators and exhibition and economic development. However, I think that nobody will go nowadays to invest in Argentina to create a new show. But that's now. We won't know what's going on in the next 2 or 3 years. So be patient and analyze the region in terms of a long approach. Then the third difference will be that exhibitions can be held in places with no well equipment for the exhibition activity. We have already made a comment that only 40% of the exhibition activity takes place in convention centers and venues. And to be honest, not necessarily all of these conventions or exhibition centers are well equipped with state-of-the-art conditions. So analyze each case. Let's go to the next point, which is the very important role of the trade and business associations as partners of the major and specialized exhibition organizers. They could be doing shows um, on their own as well. So, for example, the Association of Textiles in Paraguay, this is just an example that I'm making up, creates their own association on their own, and they do not partner with exhibition organizer. Um, so their role is very important. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to talk about other opportunities aside from Brazil, because the opportunities in Brazil have been very well documented. And where are all of these opportunities? So if you consider the good economic perspective of the Latin American region, as we have mentioned before, and the importance of a growing middle class, you could say that there are a lot of opportunities to come here and do businesses. And it's not easy to choose where. However, we have to take consideration of other indicators, and that's when we analyze the matrix with the 9 indicators. And if we analyze all that, we could say that, of course, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, followed by Chile and Peru, will be the best places to come here and join the exhibition activity. Again, Latin America is very heterogeneous region, so you cannot talk about only one reality in one country, and please analyze each case in particular. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. What would be a surprise for some of the companies in the rest of the world in terms of exhibition activity? As I mentioned before, there are some restraints in infrastructure. I'll give you some examples of cases. For example, Lima. Lima only has one convention center that is not very large. So sometimes exhibition organizers have to do exhibitions in different places, as we saw before. And of course, that's a limitation. And that's not appealing for exhibitors or visitors. Of course, it's better, more convenient to do a proper exhibition in a convention center and not in a park. Another case is Sao Paulo. Even if Sao Paulo has one of the largest numbers of convention centers and venues in Latin America, some of them are not modern, some of them are outdated, and some of them don't even have air conditioning. I'm not criticizing that, I'm just saying that to do an exhibition in the summertime without air conditioning, it's not very nice either. Sao Paulo, well, the authorities in Sao Paulo and some of these venues and exhibition organizers are very aware of that, and there are some projects to be developing new infrastructure projects in the following years. But at this moment, actually, there is I forgot the word. There are not enough venues to hold all of the exhibitions in Brazil, and that's one of the limitations for the increase in the number of exhibitions in Brazil, especially Sao Paulo. Then let's talk about Bogota and Santiago. There is one big and proper venue in each city. However, if the exhibition activity increase number of shows, we will need to do something, or we will need to reaccommodate the activity, because the current condition is perfect, but if it grows in a higher rate, then it won't be appropriate. In contrast, the last case that I'm just going to talk about in infrastructure is Mexico, because there are a lot of venues and convention centers, and actually there is a surplus, and convention centers are competing very high between them because they need to bring events to their places, and sometimes um, they don't know what to do to bring new events to their convention centers, which are very modern, very well structured, and new. So the second surprise will be the very different nature of the exhibition activity in each country, as I mentioned before, and I wanted to have this in mind as one of the most important conclusions of this webinar. The other surprising factor will be the concentration of the activity, or the big concentration of the activity, in only 20 or 30 cities in Latin America. So I think that gives a lot of room for mergers and acquisitions and new launches, because there are a lot of cities in which some venues and exhibition organizers are present, and the economy is doing well, and the market will be ready to hold another exhibition, but that hasn't happened yet. So there is room here to come and do businesses. And the last surprising factor will be the fact that the market is very segmented in terms of exhibition organizers. Um, you cannot talk about a single player in Mexico or Brazil. There are many exhibition organizers. There is no a leader in the industry. I would say that the only different case is Colombia, where Competitiveness has uh, a very leading position. And of course, with a very segmented market, you have room for a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So let's go to the next slide. We are almost about to finish. And these are the challenges that we have identified in terms of the exhibition industry. Of course, we need more and better infrastructure. We need government support. I haven't talked about it before, but there are no governmental policies. I mean, there are some governmental policies that support the industry, but that's not common. There are only in particular cases, and that's I mean, only some countries like Mexico or Brazil have a national policy for the exhibition industry, for improving the conditions of the exhibition industry, and the rest of the countries have um, city policies. So you can come here to Panama City, and the government will give the floor plan for free, the exhibition space for free, if you celebrate your exhibition here, because they need to fill out the convention centers that they have. That's only in the city of Panama, not in the whole country. And we can think about it in terms of Colombia, when it's the same in Bogota, in terms of the support from the local government. And you can think about many cases, but it's not a common policy. So we need the inclusion of technology. Some shows show very well, very important technology in terms of applications and the way they use IT platforms, but that's not very common. The use of the latest trends still very poor, and we need to do a lot in that aspect. Of course, we need to improve our business models. Some exhibitions are still considering that that the most important factor is to sell square meters rather than content, networking opportunities, educational opportunities, and so on. Some of these models need to be changed and adjusted to the trends in the international field. The next challenge will be that we need more international visitors and exhibitors. The numbers are not that high. In some cases, they are, but again, it's not in the majority of the cases. Better information. Exhibition companies need to provide better information, and again, we are working on it. Certified exhibitions are not the most common case. The last thing that I will tell you about the trends is that it's very important in Latin America to do business with people. So people are very important for the development of the activity. So you don't need to have a lot of investment bankers or lawyers, but you need to be very friendly and to have in mind that our culture is very open and friendly. So if you won't behave in that direction, then you have to do something and adjust to our culture. Time is flexible. We don't start meetings very punctual sometimes, or we could even move meetings and postpone it for like another day or half an hour or something like that. Doesn't happen always, but it could happen, and you would need to understand that flexibility. Networking is less formal, and the importance of emotions and feelings in the business context. As, as I mentioned before, these emotions come from people, so have that in mind. Emotions and feelings take place, are important in terms of developing a new relation, a new business relation. So, okay, I have two more slides. This is the summary of a survey that we did in three very important multinationals that are here operating in the region. Those are in Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia. And they gave us some comments about their experience in the last years here in the region. They mentioned that they have they have to understand the need to tropicalize their events in order to be accepted by the local market. So they cannot bring here their their way of doing business and just implant it here and um, like to demand the business environment to respond well to their business model, but they have had to tropicalize their business model and um, yeah, to adapt it to the Latin American reality. The second comment is that they need to develop relations with the government and trade associations. As I mentioned before, the power of trade associations, it's very important. And even if the government does not offer um, supportive policies for the activity, the government can ruin your activity because of barriers or taxes. So be friendly with the governmental officers and ministries and try to have good relations with them. The third aspect is that they have been able to understand the regional cycles of the economy. As I mentioned before, we have suffered a lot of cycles, and having a long-term vision will help them to do business better here. The fourth advice will be do not go alone into the market. Find a reliable and experienced local partner. And we can make the comment of some experience of multinationals here in Latin America that have gone alone into a new market and they haven't done well because they thought they could do good or they could do well on their own, and they realized that without a local partner, the operation is not very simple. Then they recommend thinking local, which of course you have heard this term before. That's not doing a copy-paste model. You have to think global, but in terms of the local reality. Then you have to be cautious with the local competition. We have we have summarized that some of these exhibition companies are not very matured or very developed in terms of the models that they offer to their clients or exhibitors. And you may think that if you are a very large company in Europe, Asia, or the US, you would come here and will take the whole market because it will be very easy for you to overcome your competitors. But that's not necessarily the case. Do not underestimate them because they could give you a surprise. Or the local market could be united against the international player, so be cautious with them. And of course, the last comment or advice will be develop concepts of business models. Do not pretend that you only have to sell square meters. Okay, so this is the presentation that I have prepared for today, and I'm just going to make the last comment. If you want to know more the Latin American exhibition industry, please come here to the next UFI Congress. I'm inviting you all. It's going to take place here in Bogota next October, from October 29th to November 1st. You will be surprised by what we have to offer you. It's going to be here in my hometown, and we are very honored and excited to be receiving you all. And if you come to the Congress, we're going to give you the new edition of the Latin American Exhibition Industry 2015-2016 book. which is a book written in English, almost 300 pages, and the book is produced by AFIDA, AUMA, UFI, and Local Global. So we are ready to receive you guys here. And well, it was the presentation that I have for today. So this is my contact details. I don't know if anyone has a question. Okay, Paul says, do you think we will see a 100,000 square meter venue in Latin America within 5 years? Definitely. Actually, there is a project, like I made a comment, in Brazil, because they are trying to bring a lot of congresses, not only exhibitions, but congresses to the region, and they are aware of the need to change and improve the infrastructure. So if it doesn't happen in Brazil, I'm pretty sure it will happen in Mexico. And some other countries may surprise us. Panama is building a new convention center and venue. Of course, it's not more than 100,000 square meters. But if the country keeps, if the region keeps growing, and if the exhibitions keep coming, of course, governments and the public and the private sector will realize the need of big investment will bring a lot of revenue, and that they will realize that it's important, and they will support a project like that. So maybe we should wrap up for today, and I'm again open to ask any comments or questions, and of course I will send you the presentation in case you want to review it in more detail. So thank you everyone, and have a nice evening or day.